Hi folks, I'm Theta, this is Casual Monday. It's the 7th week of the fall 2018 season. I ended up with slightly more time than I expected this week, so we don't have the drastically shorter show that I anticipated. There are links in the description to the specific anime we are covering today, including a miscellaneous section for the shorter takes, which you can see listed here. The next 2 weeks, however, this will be greatly curtailed. 3 to 4 shows at best. I know some of these are just getting good, but it is what it is, so let's get to it. In that time I got reincarnated as a slime, most of the episode was taken up by a battle sequence. Cool sequence, interesting to see how magic and combat work in this world and get a first glimpse of the trio in action, but fight scenes aren't really the best subject for my style of analysis. I'm more interested in why Shizu was triggered into that fight in the first place. As expected, our summoner is not a wellspring of comfort and understanding, and forcing Shizu to dispatch her friend rather than doing it himself, well, that is some rapid characterization. Thus we know that Shizu is not attacking Rimuru and the rest because she suddenly became murderous, but likely because her summoner triggered Ifrit to take over, or Ifrit himself ran amok. Is this a normal occurrence for Shizu? Or is her statement about looking for the person who summoned her mean that she is hunting that person? From the trio's reaction, we know that Shizu is the Conqueror of Flames, a legendary hero that has been active for decades, but their reaction is also one of fear, so perhaps there is more than just this one rampage in her past. But is it initiated intentionally, or just a result of her losing control, and or Ifrit having the ability to overpower her? Now, Rimuru swallows Ifrit by the end. It's very nice of him to bring Veldora some company, but how did he swallow Ifrit and not Shizu? And I guess more importantly, is there not going to be a side effect to separating them? Is Shizu at the end dead? Mortally wounded? Or otherwise incapacitated? I feel like maybe the reason the human form of Rimuru that we see in the credits looks the way it does is because it's a blue-themed version of Shizu? Is he going to swallow her Predator style in order to try to save her or preserve her or something? Is this what the fortune meant about them being destined to be together? Like, literally together? That would be quite a shift, and if so, then a lot of these questions I have right now are kind of meaningless. So, we will pick this back up once we actually know Shizu's fate. In Zombieland Saga, first of all, wow, Junko can freaking sing. So, like we suggested last time, the storm was pretty expected. Actually getting zapped by lightning, also kind of expected. Giving them laser finger guns and auto-tune, not as expected. Appropriately then, their breakout performance is going to come about because they were zombies. Any other idol group would simply have been fried. Now, I talked last time about the conversation about the relationship between artist and audience. This episode manages to help patch up the personal conflict that arose between Ai and Junko, but it does so without elevating one position over the other. The series didn't pick sides in the debate. Alongside that, Kotaro reveals that he has some hidden depths. I'd already suggested that his over-the-top, borderline abusive persona may be something of an act, but his heart-to-heart with Junko makes you wonder if he actually believes in the mission or purpose of idols at some kind of spiritual level. I also realize that Kotaro may be making them figure out their own issues on purpose. Early on, the band names he comes up with are zombie euphemisms, Greenface and Death Musume, but once they name themselves, he embraces it. This episode, he yells at Sakura to solve her own problems, but then tells Junko that she can make her own decision and be her own character, even if that means skipping the meet and greet. And also, fix the door. His speech to her about being her own character is especially interesting in light of the way he only named them with numbers. Just like the band name, I wonder if Kotaro wants them to figure out who they are for themselves and, by extension, who they are as a group. The show itself might have some hidden depths down the stretch. In Karakuri Circus, we got the first hints of a myth arc connecting our original prologue sequence to the rest of the anime. We also learned that the word Shirogane may be a title rather than a name, and that it's borne by others who fight against the automata. Considering what Shirogane's training consisted of, it makes me wonder if this idea of needing to be a puppet, of being as relentless and unthinking as the machines, is something they believe necessary to be able to fight against them. That seems to be demonstrated in a different way inside this hellish hospital, where the emotional burden on the staff is so great that they've turned to drug use to keep from getting pulled under. They can't save the kids necessarily, so the least they can do is smile for them to help their symptoms, and they need to medicate themselves to do so. This puts them in stark contrast to Narumi and the way he smiled through hardship, inspiring Masuru to try to do the same, something we talked about at length last time. So far, there is no hint of motive for the automata that we see. We just know that they are directed by something called the Midnight Circus, then they spread the Zone Alpha disease. That syndrome ends up being quite a bit more than just an excuse for Narumi to act the fool. I wonder how he even got it, since everyone else in that hospital seems to be kids. Or maybe it's just incredibly rare to make it out of childhood, which is why he was being scouted in the first place? Anyway, the automata seem fundamentally different from puppets and puppeteers in that they are sentient and self-contained. All that human blood talk and the way they attack the guards with a machine-like proboscis makes me wonder if they are parasitic or vampiric or otherwise predatory towards mankind. This is just one of the ways this episode ramps up the fantastical, as we also have the Aqua Vitae and Narumi's spiritual power from his martial arts being basically kryptonite to the automata, not to mention the nightmarish final stage of Zone Alpha. Anyway, I wonder how the puppeteer factions in Japan relate to this larger automata conflict. Guy says that he is French, and he seems intentionally to look like a male version of Shirogane, so we have to assume that her own training was related to the struggle against the Midnight Circus. How did she end up in the care of a Japanese businessman, and why are the puppeteers native to Japan more like mercenaries than an anti-automata force? I feel like we have way more questions than answers now. In Iroduku, we got some long overdue development of some of our side characters. Not a ton to say on it, other than this focus reinforces what we talked about last time, that finding purpose and a direction for one's future is a central theme, and that what drives you or what you are passionate about may be related to Hitomi's color and magic problems. Last episode ended with her regaining her colors, only now to have lost them again. Whatever restored them was a fleeting thing, and she has no real clue as to why they came back, even if briefly. However, Yuito being able to draw again, and his assertion that it's because someone is watching him, links his own stalemate to a sense of purpose that he has regained for the moment. In the drawing he presents to Hitomi, you can see that he made an effort to include the full array of colors, even grouping them around objects which are mostly a single color. It's like he is trying to help Hitomi understand what color these objects are normally. He clearly drew this with her in mind as his audience. Hitomi, for her part, seems poised to reveal her colorblindness to the others. That may lead to her relating her past and how she came to only see in monochrome. Maybe it will be purely a magical side effect, maybe it will be related to some trauma like I suggested last time, and maybe the solution will have to do with finding purpose or maybe even being someone else's purpose. Certainly this episode's focus suggests the latter will be part of the solution in some way or another. We also introduced another form of creative expression with Kurumi's sister and her great labor to become a pastry chef. The fact that all the passions we see driving our characters are forms of creativity is probably no accident, prompting us to think of magic as more art than science. Thus, it might be more appropriate to think of what Hitomi needs is not so much purpose as inspiration. In Sword Art Online, the logical conclusion to having the underworld sense of time moving way faster than real time is that Kirito and Yujiro would time skip relative to Asuna and the rest. Thus, we have at least a plausible way for them to have found themselves this close to being true swordsmen, and Kirito having figured out a lot of the mechanics of the world. I get the sense that Wrath can control exactly how fast time runs relatively, so I'm not sure how much time in the real world is represented by 2 years in Underworld, but I'm guessing not very long. The good news is that it means we can time skip in a way that matches our world-building rules, even if it necessitates some exposition to keep us in the loop. The bad news is, isn't Kirito aging in a sense? I mean, at least his mind? 2 years and presumably more to come without being around anyone who knows they're in a simulation, and without seeing his friends or Asuna, that should take a toll. I have no idea if they will wade into such a confusing subject, but I can't help but feel that Wrath's efforts are really wasted on trying to create a military usable form of AI. Instead, plug some great philosophers or writers or something into your system. Let them spend decades at a time honing their ideas in the works, and then pull them out again without having them age more than a couple of days. If these 2 years have really felt like 2 years for Kirito, and he's had 2 years worth of thoughts and introspection, then the amazing thing they've invented is not bottom-up AI, but a way to accelerate thought itself. Sorry, I know that has nothing to do with the story we've returned to inside of Underworld, but I can't help but feel that it should matter that he is now mentally older than his real self, unless they intend to wipe out his memories upon extraction. We'll see if the subject comes up at all, but it's definitely interesting. So, Golden Kamuy, if you aren't watching this show, I don't know what to tell you. Mark it down for later or something. It's different enough from a lot of anime that I can understand it not being everyone's cup of tea. But it feels a lot more like an HBO or Showtime miniseries drama than a simple historical anime, with the sheer complexity of the plot and the size of the cast, and how much time is devoted to developing the huge cast of characters. It has episodic moments, but is obviously a grand narrative from the beginning. It's definitely still anime, with anime's trademark ability to inject exaggeration into any situation, but that doesn't mean it won't circle back around to more somber moments to connect us to our characters, as these last episodes have demonstrated. I mostly want to talk about our 18th installment and relate it a bit to part of our 17th. This last episode was almost entirely about Tanigaki, who has been a supporting character for the most part. We begin in the present with him musing on the idea that he might have found his purpose, and we will eventually loop back to the present at the end as well. In the middle, we have a flashback of how he came to be in the 7th Division and his own part of the story of Hill 203. However, it's framed inside of him telling that story to Lieutenant Tsurumi, presumably because Tanigaki was looking for purpose for his role in life, and Tsurumi is trying to offer him one. That we know he has given that up in the interim gives a very interesting meta-narrative to the story that he relates. It's a story inside a framing story, inside a future memory, and the difference between those middle steps represents the change in the character since the retelling of the very story we are just now hearing. I like this technique, and I'm surprised I don't see more of it. Anyway, his is a story about revenge and the lengths he goes to in order to exact it. He pays a high price. He may have inadvertently caused his mother's death, and he is surely unable to return home, causing his father and brother to lose him as well. He joins in the war and loses his home and family, and ultimately, his revenge was founded on misinformation. But he actually gets something better. A piece about his sister's death and his former friend, as well as the unique opportunity for each of them to put things right before the friend's death. His past life is now given a sense of completion, and yet it is lost to him. He must seek out a new role and new home. This is actually foreshadowed by the way he breaks taboo to add something to his kanimochi. It's a clever symbol because while it serves a narrative purpose of letting Kinkichi know that his words have reached Tanigaki, it also tells us early on that Tanigaki is not held to the traditions or constraints of his people. His willingness to defy convention over something so immaterial suggests that he was probably always at risk to leave their village, some part of him strained against the status quo. He didn't find his purpose among the 7th, but it seems to have stumbled into something like purpose among the Ainu and their notions of family. Despite being in the thick of this gold-chasing conflict, Tanigaki seems like he might be oddly at peace. This comes in sharp contrast to the episode just before, which had a heart-wrenching scene between Asura and Sugimoto as they shelter from the storm inside a deer carcass. In that scene, Sugimoto's seemingly innocent recollections about dried persimmons eventually lead to thoughts about how his life was before and after the war, and how he is forever changed because of the experience. He explains how you have to destroy yourself to survive on the battlefield, that you cannot think of those you fight against as people just like yourself. This takes a toll. He thinks about how many other people caught up in this conflict are just like him, people whose hearts have never left the battlefield. There is a naive sweetness in Asura's question about whether or not he can go back to who he was if he just has some dried persimmons. Sugimoto has seemingly always been the immortal one, the guy who always presses forward and never doubts and never gives up. But Asura's question brings the realization of how far he's changed to the forefront, and though he tries to hide his tears, the question wrecks him. To this point, he's had other goals and purposes to chase, always taking steps forward. In this moment, he looks back to see how many of those steps he's taken and how far backward they stretch. As I said, this contrasts with Tanigaki's episode about where he came from and where he has ended up. He left his home and culture and eventually the path of revenge itself. In that trench when he was preparing to murder Kenkichi, he was definitely the picture of what Sugimoto mentioned about needing to destroy yourself. But whatever peace he seems to have found now did not come from trying to return home, or trying to return to the person he was. Sugimoto will likewise find no peace in chasing backwards after his past. While I do believe he will still try to make good on taking care of his friend's wife, he will need a purpose beyond that. Thus, there is a certain finality to Asura's request that he take her to his homeland when all this is over. She, too, has been slowly pushing further away from where she started, and the revelation about her father is going to leave her increasingly rudderless. She can't go home again either, not really. Though there may be no pending happiness for these two, peace for either of them seems like it will require they accept a future that bears little resemblance to their past. Sugimoto has increasingly attached his purpose to seeing things through for Asura, and I think it's natural to assume that if peace awaits him, it will come from his support of her. Maybe they leave Hokkaido together and put all this behind them. Maybe they take his friend's wife to America for whatever medical procedure was referenced back at the beginning. Or maybe Sugimoto surrenders his status as immortal for one final act of safeguarding Asura. All of these seems like decisions that could reward him with peace at Journey's End. Right now, Tanigaki's story in episode 18 seems like a blueprint for what our characters should aim toward, and that may one day include abandoning a path toward revenge. So despite the unexpected turn at the end of the last episode of Bunny Girl Senpai, Shoko's introduction does not mean the next arc is about her. The episode certainly starts as though she will get focus, giving us a longer version of the flashback between her and Sakata when they met. In that encounter, Sakata is openly hostile to her, but she persists to ask after him. This makes me wonder if she already knew him and his troubles, and so is able to brush aside his combativeness to try to help. Considering the age disparity between her then and her now, some kind of scenario where she is unstuck in time may be at play, and although that's the first time Sakata is meeting her, it is not the first time for her. She has some goal that his rudeness will not put her off from, but ultimately Shoko is not the focus right now. Rather, we have elements of her situation woven into someone else's arc, though the extent of that situation right now is simply to come into regular contact with Sakata and Kaede. This is actually just like the way Futaba's situation and crush on Kunimi was woven into the Tomoe arc, and likewise how Tomoe was introduced during Mai's arc. Maybe this means Shoko is next, or maybe we are going to begin coloring her in slowly in the same way we have done for Kaede all along. Regardless, our current crisis is all about Futaba. Or should I say, Futari Taba? Tutaba? You get the idea. There are two of our science-minded friend running around, and though they look similar and can reproduce the other's train of thought, they do not seem to share experiences. In fact, one of them says that she hasn't even seen the other, yet she knows that she is living in her house and going to school in her place, and so steps aside and hides in a net cafe on her own. I'm curious how she figured any of that out. At the least, it preserves the possibility that there are not actually physically two of them, prompting Sakata to have Mai keep watch over one of our futabas while he goes to confront the other. To make this easier, let's refer to the futaba currently at Sakata's house as Glasses, and the one going to school and Kunimi's practices as Ponytail. Cool? Cool. While the way they physically present themselves does provide the audience with visual shorthand to keep them apart, I suspect that the decision to change appearance is related to the fundamental reason there are two of them in the first place. Put simply, Futaba wants to be the kind of girl that appeals to Kunimi, and she also wants to be the person she's always been. I mean, maybe it's more than just appealing to Kunimi, but that's the motivation that has been hinted at thus far. Sakata even tells Ponytail that she doesn't appeal to Kunimi, so Ponytail, at the very least, is the part of Futaba that wants to change whatever is necessary to increase that appeal. She wants him to look at her differently, as a woman rather than a friend, and the first step is to change up, well, how she looks. So up goes the hair into something more flattering. Off come the glasses and the lab coat. And having made these alterations, she needs them to also be seen by him, so she goes to the practice games. She has excuses for all of these steps, of course, some plausible deniability. She's wearing contacts, so can't wear glasses. It's hot outside, so her hair is up. She has to keep doing activities at the school or her club might get shut down. The gym is on the way to her club room, and so on. However, the crisis appears to go further than just a split personhood. Ponytail has begun uploading suggestive photos of herself in a secret, but apparently not that secret, account. I think this is a much bigger deal for a girl in Japan's high school system than the same scenario over on this side of the Pacific, especially doing so in her high school uniform. I'll be curious to see if the first of these photos happened before or after Futaba split, but if we assume that each can reproduce the other's thoughts because they are the same person underneath, then it means that Futaba secretly wants to be an object of desire, to feel desirable. Okay, I guess that's basically everyone, but she clearly has not felt desirable to the degree that she wants. Perhaps she believes this is impossible for who she is, or she doesn't want to admit that she feels this way. After all, Ponytail is confident she knows why the split happened, and accuses Glasses of lying about not understanding why. Regardless of the full reason, that suggests a lack of honesty with oneself as a central issue. Does that sound familiar? Now, once Sakata corners Glasses, she reveals that this split has been ongoing for 3 days. Although it's buried in an earlier conversation, I am guessing that the inciting incident for this was Kunimi's trip to the beach with his girlfriend. Though we can guess with confidence that Kunimi is at the center of this because of the build-up before this episode, having the incident specifically be a beach trip gives the crisis a bit of focus. The beach is a context-appropriate place for people to shed most of their clothing, and there is thus an increased emphasis on physical attractiveness in that setting. Wrong or right, I could see Futaba concluding that the difference between her and Kamisato is the way they present physically. Thus, the ponytail version of her is focused on a specific kind of appeal, and perhaps this is what has led to the secret account and its postings. The question I have right now is, what is the point of that account being secret if it's Kunimi's attention that she wants? What purpose is there in attention from other students or anonymous people on the net? I don't think this is the usual situation with people posting, flattering pictures, hoping for positive attention and a nice bump to self-confidence or self-worth. That's too tame of a reason for our series. But along that same vein, is it possible that she is trying to leverage the atmosphere on purpose? Futaba has had a ringside seat for Sakata's misadventures, and must surely have internalized this whole notion of the social atmosphere having real power. Is Ponytail thus trying to have the general student population see her as more desirable, in hopes that the atmosphere will affect that same change in Kunimi? There is a social phenomenon where knowing someone is seen as attractive by the average person will increase your own impression of their attractiveness. That seems like just the kind of subconscious instincts that adolescent syndrome could kick up a notch. And if anyone seems capable of doing so deliberately, experimentally, then it would be Futaba. We do see her being noticed by the other guys at the basketball practice with her changed appearance, and we can guess that this is a departure from the norm. The end credits likewise have her shed her lab coat and put her hair up as she walks along, further emphasizing the deliberateness of the transformation. Even if she's not leveraging the atmosphere on purpose, I'll be interested to see if Ponytail is going to swing too much in one direction over this desire, or if conversely, Glasses swings too much in the opposite direction. She did just meekly give up her home and school life and begin squatting in a net cafe. That seems like a step up from her usual timidity. Anyway, other stuff happened this time, and I'll just run through it in brief. Kaede's BroCon stuff continues, but I feel it manages to be humorous rather than disturbing because of how blunt Sakata is about it. Underneath that, though, there is an ongoing issue with her greatly reduced social circle, that she has no one else to project toward or receive affection from besides him. Mai has really come to the rescue on this by reaching across the distance between them. Shoko, and now Futaba, spending time with her widens this circle even further, and in an environment where she feels quite safe. The fact that she is at ease with these three girls, even while her brother is out of the house, is serious progress that should not be overlooked. It makes me wonder if we will see her overt affection towards Sakata start to trail off in tandem with her increased socialization with other people. She still has a long way to go, to be sure, as the awesome detail of Mai's phone ringing illustrated. Kaede immediately flinches, and Mai immediately realizes the problem and steps outside. That is some fine show don't tell, trusting that we in the audience understand what that brief exchange meant and how it reminds us of Kaede's ongoing problem. That phone call itself may introduce a new wrinkle, as her agent was unaware that Mai had a boyfriend. I don't know how it is for actresses, but I know that in idol culture, there is often a prohibition against dating. This preserves the illusion that the idols are attainable, part of the whole package of being this idealized boy or girl for fans to fawn over. Thus, I can see an argument that Mai would be hurting her career opportunities by dating, especially dating some random classmate. If her agent didn't know about Sakata, then it's not public knowledge, but I could see trying to head this off at the past. Her agent has a job, and part of that job is, well, increasing her appeal. The very same thing that Futaba might be doing for herself, and both may face a potential sacrifice down the line. Futaba may have to accept that being more appealing to Kunimi requires her to be fundamentally different than she has been, and she will have to decide which person she wants to be, or if such a change is too high a price. If I'm guessing right, then Mai might have a similar scenario. Would she give up Sakata to increase her appeal in her line of work? Though I don't think Mai would simply drop him out of self-interest, Sakata himself might be supportive of her doing whatever she needs to do to chase her own happiness. Even though Mai doesn't know about the whole fake relationship with Tomoe now, Sakata does. Is he really in position to object to her pretending to be single when he pretended to be someone else's boyfriend? There's actually more than just this parallel at work in this episode. Futaba has had a certain lack of initiative in dealing with her crush on Kunimi, which might have helped catalyze the split. Sakata shows a similar lack of initiative when it comes to making a move on Mai, managing to still botch it up even when she prompts him. But it's not like he's blown it for all time, as Mai indicates pretty clearly. Just like Futaba, Mai wants to feel desirable, wants to be pursued. Having her boyfriend take the initiative to be more intimate lets her know that she appeals to him. He's always been exaggeratedly forward in what he says to her, so to actively try to kiss her or other forms of physical intimacy probably feels a lot more like a genuine expression of desire. Tomoe also shows up to give us a thematic parallel. Just after Sakata is drawing attention to Futaba and how she would look in a yukata, and how she has no self-confidence about it, Tomoe shows up in a yukata. She also has some self-confidence hang-ups about it, but for the completely opposite reason as Futaba. Each has reservations about how they appear in the same kind of outfit, and yet they have taken opposite actions. This mirrors how each of them behaved before their run-ins with adolescent syndrome. Tomoe went for something bold and active while obeying social conventions, constructing an entire look and personality out of thin air. Meanwhile, Futaba withdraws and tries to ignore her problem. One was active and the other passive, yet the solution for each requires hiding some part of themselves, of failing to be perfectly honest about what they want or who they are. I probably don't need to point out that this is a bit of a pattern in our series, and so it seems likely that Futaba facing herself will be part of the solution. We'll see, but I won't be surprised if this ends up being quite literal, with Glasses and Ponytail having it out about what brought them to this point. This week's Bloom Into You centered around secrets and the subject of girl-girl relationships in general. As we guessed, Sayaka has a thing for Nanami, but this episode fills her out as someone who has been stung in the past by the barriers around girls' love. It's noted that her transferring away from a school that was middle school and high school combined was unusual, though she explains it away as wanting to be closer to home. However, the real reason is that she decided she wouldn't fall for another girl, and so wanted to attend a co-ed school. Thus, even when she finds herself smitten with Nanami, she is not about to act on it. Instead, she takes comfort in the idea that Nanami has no room in her heart for anyone. The question of whether or not they could be together is decided even before it comes up, at least to Sayaka's mind. In this way, her attachment to Nanami and desire to keep things as they are mirrors Nanami's own attachment to Yu, as she believes Yu will never return her love. The current situation will simply continue. Of course, Sayaka being into girls means that she is sensitive to that possibility, which is why she zeroes in on the coffeehouse owner and their teacher being a couple. At first, I didn't like that they spelled it out for us, as just her saying "okaeri" and then fumbling when asked about how they know each other is enough to figure it out. But it actually sets up the two of them to be in a different place about how open they are. That sets up a contrast with Nanami and Yu's relationship, as well as the secret desire that Sayaka hides in herself. The coffeehouse owner is likewise perceptive enough to realize that if Sayaka suspected them, then she herself might also be into girls and struggling because of it. More on that in a moment. Sayaka's sensitivity to the subject might be why she is so suspicious of Nanami and Yu. Before, her suspicion could be dismissed as jealousy, as Yu seemed to be supplanting her own role as support and close friend to Nanami. But if she's also suspicious that one or both of them could be into girls, then her probing and confrontational antics might prove to be a real threat to their secrecy. That said, Sayaka might instead have a form of perceptual blindness and miss the romantic tension between those two entirely. Nanami herself muses on how Sayaka doesn't ask about the person hidden behind the role she plays of being perfect. That may be because she doesn't want to see anything besides that role. She crushes on the Nanami that is superlative, a leader, accomplished, and beautiful, etc. She thinks that Nanami keeps everyone at arm's length, and she is fine with that, prefers it even, as it means that she can stay by her side. If she has no chance to cross that distance, then there's no sense in risking it, but nor is there anything pushing her further away. She doesn't want to see the chinks in the armor, and so she doesn't. She doesn't want to imagine Nanami belonging to anyone, and so she doesn't. This nevertheless weighs on Sayaka, and so she finds it easy to confess her situation to the coffeehouse owner. Secrets are easier to bear when shared, and it's often easier to unload your secrets on a stranger than anyone who is connected to your life. The way the owner is so willing to be frank about her own situation likely galvanizes this confession as well. Though Sayaka makes no plan of action from their exchange, she at least is able to put into words her own sense of priority. Confessing to Nanami would be a burden to her, and she would be more useful to her as a friend at arm's length. Thus, she will swallow how she feels to better support Nanami. This is Sayaka's form of kindness, and Nanami herself perceives that the way Sayaka doesn't ask her to be anything different than what she presents is kind. But it's quite different from Yu, who will push Nanami like no one else and yet is completely accepting of whatever side of herself Nanami displays. However, Sayaka might indeed be right about Nanami as far as her not having any room in her heart for the feelings of other people. If Yu does indeed succeed in her desire to fall in love, she might find herself being the very source of stress that Sayaka is biting her tongue to avoid. For now, though, all of them are content to keep their secrets, and this episode reminds us just how many we are accumulating. Yu is unable to tell Koyumi what Nanami is really like, as all her insights would give away their ongoing trysts. Yu is also unwilling to tell Nanami that her reaction to being called by her first name is adorable. And of course, keeping her own goal of falling for her a secret plays into that decision. And Nanami has her own, like last time's reveal about hoping Yu never actually falls for her. She also obviously keeps it a secret that she knows Sayaka prefers the perfect image version of her. That makes me wonder if she suspects Sayaka's feelings, though if she did, she will keep that to herself as well. However, there is some progress against the keeping of secrets in this episode, and that comes from Nanami calling Yu by her first name in public. I really wanted to see Sayaka's head explode from Yu calling her Toko in return, but alas, maybe one day. I know I harp about the power of names in fiction a lot, but Japanese culture and language is one of those real-life examples of the trope in action. What two people call each other tells you something about their relationship, and in a far more nuanced way than examples which exist in English. It's one of the primary reasons I avoid dubs. Sometimes the only real clue you have that two people are changing in relation to one another is that the way they address each other changes, or that there's a difference in what they call one another in public versus private, and English isn't equipped to adequately represent that gradient. There is a reason this is especially relevant to lovers. The short version is that there is an implied status hierarchy as part of this naming scheme, giving deference to someone who is older, has been in a position longer, has more authority, or has some inherent nobility or royalty or prestige. And then, there is just the base level of respectful distance between two people who are of similar status. Using some variation of a more familiar name signals a breach of the walls that the system creates between people. Lovers using each other's names, or even attaching a more familiar honorific, is an overt sign of intimacy, of walls coming down, of distances crossed. This is why Nanami falls to pieces over Yu calling her Toko, even with the Senpai honorific attached. It's why everyone on the council immediately notices the change in familiarity. Even when a couple of them float the idea of other shakeups, it doesn't take, and the other changes are refused. Though, not without Nanami having a momentary panic at Sayaka being familiar with Yu. If you want to see some attention to detail, watch how Nanami's shoulders relax halfway through Sayaka deciding against using Yu's first name. Nanami would suck at poker, which means that her affection towards Yu gets closer to being outed every day, especially if she is willing to take this kind of risk. This focus on secrets and Sayaka's perception of the teacher-coffeehouse owner relationship may be a whole episode example of foreshadowing. I'm uncertain what would happen if Yu and Nanami's situation came out to the school at large. When such a thing might happen makes a pretty big difference. Currently, I think Nanami would just torch their relationship entirely, and Yu would probably resign off the council or something and try to forget it. But if such a thing happens down the road, after they have more invested in one another, and maybe Yu has a change of heart, I feel like that would be a different story. This episode really suggests to me that we'll have another breach of their secrecy somewhere down the line. Such a crucible will tell us a lot about our characters in that moment. In Goblin Slayer, we got additional links to the gods and the greater mythology of this world, something I thought might increase in visibility as we continued. The murals they discover under the city appear to refer to battles several centuries prior during something called the Age of the Gods, and this underground complex may be a grave honoring those who fought on the side of order. Our elven ranger remarks on how it is now just a nest for goblins, musing that even the brave are at last brought low. Quite the foreshadowing for the events at the end of the episode, no? That aside, it suggests that the gods will be active or able to be affected by this world, rather than being outsiders or bystanders. The dice rolling is meant to represent their influence or interference in the course of events. I'm pretty sure of that. Yet the series has not explicitly spelled out what that means exactly. Is everything random chance to begin with, dice rolls at each junction? Or do things happen as a natural progression out of past events, with the gods throwing dice at key moments to create a chance for deviation? Is Goblin Slayer special in any sense, by being more or less susceptible to divine interference? Our Sword Maiden's comments in the bath about Goblin Slayer one day disappearing seem ominous in their own right, but as she is the representative of the supreme god, I have to wonder if what she is saying is a kind of divination. Goblin Slayer's actions toward the end of the fight sequence have a sense of intervention to them as well, of some intrusion by powers of fate or of the divine. He appears to be incapacitated or even mortally wounded, and an intense sequence of distorted screams play over scenes of both past trauma and the current horror show all around him. Our ever-present dice tumble through the air as he links his helplessness in the moment to his helplessness as a child during the goblin attack which forged him into the Goblin Slayer. All the while, there is some voice that is mocking him for his lack of power and his lack of action. The blazing red eye behind his helmet and its mate in the eye of the die suggests to me that some link exists between his ability to push a little bit further and the meddling of the gods. But I don't know exactly. Whatever it means, and whatever this goblin is at the end of this long tunnel, I gotta say, die like a nail hammered into a coffin is one metal phrase to go out on. Of course, that's if he really has gone out. I'm not sure what to think, though the canary may be a clue. After Goblin Slayer noticed the lack of quests for giant rats, he apparently made the leap that the environment below might be toxic. Thus, he went and bought a canary, as they are used by miners as an early warning system against toxic breathing environments, such as carbon monoxide. The canary will die long before the miners, giving them a chance to react. Because of this, the expression of the canary in the coal mine has come to mean anything that gives forewarning of danger, especially if that thing is an organism and the warning takes the form of something's removal or death. Ending with an image of the Goblin Slayer laid low, reflected in the canary's eye, may suggest that Goblin Slayer dying, or perhaps becoming something else as a result of this encounter, is a canary in the coal mine situation. That is, whatever happened here is a harbinger of some greater change or calamity to come. Goblin Slayer dying or being taken out in some way due to goblins suggests to the wider world that the goblin problem is no longer minor and has become a hazardous environment for everyone. Even if he isn't dead, it probably signals some shift in balance. Last thing, but I think they messed up with the canary at the end. Like, the whole sequence there is almost exactly 90 seconds long, which is the standard opening and ending credit lengths, but there are no credits over the shot of the eye. However, this video is also 90 seconds longer than it should be, 25 minutes and 10 seconds rather than 23 minutes and 40 seconds like usual. I am curious as to what has happened. If the canary reflection is meant to be the outro, then that's a lot more subtle with this whole possibility of a canary in a coal mine symbol. What I watched drew way too obvious a circle around its significance, so I'm actually going to assume we have some kind of broadcast mistake. In Gridman, we had even more of the world's mysteries laid bare, only to add a few more for good measure. Perhaps most importantly, we learned that kaiju are more powerful when born from a stronger hatred. This seems like it may be the clue as to why Akane is the one Alexis chose for everything that is going on, whatever it is that is going on. Yuta definitely echoes my thoughts here.
何が目的なんだ?
Akane's softening toward or interest in Yuta may have likewise influenced how she feels about Gridman. Meanwhile, Auntie is treated so poorly, and apparently defeating Gridman is the key to him having his own autonomy, or at least that's what he believes, and so all the resentment and trauma he is building up is directed at Gridman rather than Akane or Alexis, at least for now. Leaving aside Alexis punishing him at the end of the episode, Akane has demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward Auntie ever since he first failed, something visually represented this time by her smushing the special dog that he stole from Yuta. She thinks nothing of doing this to Auntie, yet when the volleyball girls smushed hers back in episode 1, she was affronted enough to want to kill them off. However, isn't it implied that Auntie must have been born from Akane's heart, just like the other kaiju, and therefore encompasses some aspect of herself? Is that both why she throws hate at him, but also why Rika finds compassion toward him? Akane's twisted personality is at the center of our conflict, and at the end, Yuta seems to realize that they will need to do something about her heart in addition to fighting the kaiju. Something is quite broken inside her, but she has hidden it well. It's not really surprising that Utsumi would refuse to believe bad things about her at first, even hiding her interest in kaiju from the rest. Rika likewise has some past friendship with her that is still somewhat mysterious. They were unable to believe the shocking things that Yuta told them. Their initial resistance to the idea of Akane as the source of kaiju ends up having no narrative consequences. Thus, I think it is purely about progressing Akane as a character and their own understanding of her. There is a side to Akane that slipped past them, which makes one wonder what else she has kept hidden. Now, I'm still operating on the assumption that there was a reality before this one, before Akane started remaking the city in her image. Considering the hate in her heart, is it possible that she got rid of her own parents? And or somehow got to this point in her journey because of her relationship with one or both of them? Could some traumatic home life be the thing she's hidden all along, giving her plenty of practice at presenting a false front to the world? I thought before that Akane might have been remaking the world to be a wish fulfillment fantasy for herself, and part of that was making herself superlatively popular with her classmates. Is it possible that she also wished herself into a big fancy house with rows of expensive display cases for her kaiju, but she doesn't have any notion of how to take care of herself, hence all the trash piling up? Or conversely, that she was a rich girl originally, but had some hidden terrible home situation, and letting her parents' prize house fill up with garbage is a way of spiting them for their sense of priorities? The one part I can't yet parse at all is whatever was between Akane and Rika. When Akane shows up in Yuta's room, she makes an offer for him to join her, something that is one part invitation and one part seduction. But it's pretty odd for her to volunteer sharing that kind of power, right? It suggests to me that she is very lonely in spite of the power, and having someone else be a god with her strikes her as appealing. If so, why isn't Rika on her radar to be the comrade in arms? Why does Rika have a different notion of whatever happened between them than Akane has? Rika's frequent malaise about it, and buying the wallets to give her and all that indicate to us that this is important. I know it will come up, of course, but how did Akane's heart get to this place if she had a friendship that Rika, at least, thinks was very genuine? Last thing to note, I think, is that the diner owner was completely unfazed by Alexis showing up. He is one of the ones who had his memory of his daughter rewritten so that she died earlier. Doesn't this suggest that part of the rewriting process, or whatever it is, also normalizes things like Alexis to the people it affects? If so, what does it mean that some people are not normalized as such a thing yet, like Yuta? He and Rika and Utsumi and the 4 weapons always remember things before the resets, so something about their association with Gridman shields them from this rewriting and normalizing behavior. But if that's so, why haven't the rest of the population been normalized to things like the kaiju, or the apparent UFO showing up? I mention this only because it suggests that there is some kind of limit to the power Alexis wields in the city, and thus also a limit to Akane's power. This is already suggested by Auntie and his increasingly independent and defiant behavior. Akane is not an omnipotent god for the city at all, and Alexis doing things behind her back this time suggests that he has an agenda quite apart from whatever he is using Akane for. I know he's not actually her friend, right? But I like the way that his tone of voice never changes to suggest anything else. It gives his friendliness the feel of a studied performance, like a sociopath figuring out how to blend in with other people. It's all the more ironic since this might be exactly what Akane herself is doing. Cracks are going to emerge soon. That is what I really took away from this episode. Cracks between Alexis and Akane, between Auntie and both of them, and perhaps between this crafted city and whatever reality exists outside of it. That's it for this time. I will see you next week with something much shorter, I'm afraid. Till then.